Mambition, Mambition. You know it's Mambition when I've got a massive cup of coffee. Yes. Welcome back, guys. It's Tiffany in the building, and for this episode, we're going to Australia. We've got Danielle. Welcome, Danielle. How's it going?
Going great here in Melbourne. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. No worries. So, guys, you know we are on Ambition. We're going international, baby. Hooray! So, guys, just to let you know, I do have a little bit of a sore throat. So, if I do sound more like a Tim than a Tiffany, just bear with me. We'll get there. So, guys, we've got Danielle. She's incredible, and I can't wait for you guys to learn a bit more about her. So, Danielle Cahill, she's a digital news editor, storyteller, and disability journalist who has shaped how news organizations approach digital content and audience engagement. But it's a personal story that really brings her to Ambition. For her, motherhood exposed what years of coping mechanisms is hidden, leading to her own ADHD diagnosis and subsequently a children's autism diagnosis. She is a mum to a boy and a girl. They're aged 6 and 8. And yeah, I'm really excited for this one. So, Danielle, tell us more. I think a great place to start is that I think something that really resonates with every mother listening, because I've always thought that motherhood has a way of exposing things about us that we just didn't know were there. And for you,
Mhm.
it did that in a very specific and profound way. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I guess I came to motherhood a little bit later than I think some other mums might. I was in my late 30s, and I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a mum. Like I didn't necessarily know if I wanted to get married, but I knew I wanted to be a mum and have kids. And when I became a mum, a lot of my coping mechanisms in life fell apart because when you're looking after another human, you're not necessarily in charge. You know, your sleep schedule's around the baby's sleep schedule, all of the things you need to do for a little one. I found it really challenging. And look, long story short, that led me to seeking out an ADHD diagnosis. And I honestly think if I hadn't become a mum, I'm not sure I'd know this about myself. And I think, in terms of like revealing what was really there, it's also been a really interesting shift in how I see myself, but in a really healthy way. I think before I was doing a lot of pretending, a lot of masking, a lot of thinking I was just like everybody else. But now I know more about who I am and I know more about the systems that work for me and work with my brain. And a lot of the things I had been trying to do, I didn't realize just weren't suited to how I function in the world. So yeah, motherhood really did reveal a whole other part of who I am.
Wow, that's so interesting, isn't it? And I think it's interesting how something that changes you is demanding, almost takes up your time, takes up your, I don't know, capacity, takes up everything you have, actually gives you something. And I always thought about how that's what motherhood is for me, definitely. But walk us through what you noticed in yourself and how maybe you were dealing with motherhood, or how you was looking at motherhood that made you think there's something more here. Because it's interesting how when you didn't have the children, you maybe just kind of ignore those things. But I imagine they became much more apparent, because that could be useful for someone listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the research shows that for a lot of women, various big transitions in life tend to be when this shows up. Another really common one is either perimenopause or menopause as well. For me, what I noticed is that I found a lot of the early part really challenging, and not just the sleep disruption, but like the functioning without much sleep. They're trying to remember what needed to be done, which is all about sort of core working memory, executive function stuff, because it's all a bit of a fog at first. Trying to remember what the baby needs. And I know this sounds really weird, but if the baby smells, you know to change a nappy, but I wouldn't always remember to look, right? Like with
Okay.
wheeze and stuff. My kids always had nappy rash because I wouldn't always remember to look all of the time unless you necessarily remember that sort of thing. And then there was all the washing that would spend days in there and all the forms and things. And I remember when I finally did get diagnosed, our youngest at that stage, who was just a baby, this is baby number 2, and during the pandemic, she had an egg and a milk allergy. And because there was childcare, even though during lockdown we weren't able to access it because Melbourne, like everywhere else, was sort of in and out of lockdown, there was a whole lot of paperwork that went with the allergy and where it was at and if it changed and how that went with childcare. And I remember thinking, this isn't even school yet. How am I going to keep up with school if, like, the childcare paperwork was too much? And I went and had a chat a couple of times with the doctor. And initially, because lockdowns here in Melbourne had been going for so long, there was initially like a period in 2020 where the doctor's like, you're not going to be able to get in to see anyone for at least 6 months. And so I sort of left it and then asked again after 6 months. And then at that stage, I was able to find someone. But it's all of that stuff about all of the little things like the steps of motherhood that require sequences, like remembering where you are in the washing, where the dishes are at, all of those little household chores needing to be done all at once and all urgent was kind of part of where I started to go, this is actually really, this is just really, really hard. And by the time I kind of had fully gotten onto like, this is not normal, nobody else has this kind of like struggle with it, my oldest was having really big emotions that somebody else might call a meltdown. And I remember looking at him one day and thinking, God, I wish I could do that. Like I was jealous that I couldn't have a meltdown because I knew as a fully grown woman that it was not socially acceptable. And at that stage, I thought, I think maybe we both need help. I need some help because there's something happening, but I'm not sure that their response is within what would be a typical child as well. Like we both were having this moment of like, whoa, that's just some really huge emotions. And for my child, I kept like a 2-week diary because I said to the doctor, like, how common is it, like with kids with this sort of emotion? She's like, keep a diary of it. So I did. I kept a diary for 2 weeks of how long these big emotions lasted. And they lasted for well over half an hour every single day for at least 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay.
Wow. So, but so what did you when you then noticed the obviously like you could say like the tantrums, what did you then
Mm-hmm.
do next? So you thought, okay, we need to get diagnosed.
I thought we both needed some help. So, because I had been noticing for quite a while. So, by this stage, our
Mm,
eldest is a toddler, number 2 is just a couple of months old. And I'd
okay.
noticed all the way along with number 1 that I was really struggling with the household maintenance stuff
Mm,
and the
okay.
washing and all of the sequential things. And
Mm,
then with my child, I was like, okay, there's something going on there. I'm not sure what that is. It didn't seem typical. And there were other little signs too, and they weren't bad, but they were just like, that's really unusual. Like, I noticed that our child had given a lot of eye contact, and the eye contact, it didn't stop, but it just dropped a lot. And I'd noticed that with both of our kids. And it's not bad. It
cool.
is just a change that you notice because they go from looking you directly in the eye a lot to just not doing that as much. And the way that they played. So I went and got myself an ADHD referral diagnosis through my GP. And here in Australia, when you do that as an adult, all of it's private, none of it's
Okay.
government paid for. And then I had also said that I'd noticed some problems with our child, so we went to a pediatrician. And we went to a second pediatrician because the first one, the drive over there, like they had an office in one part of town and then moved to another part of town. And by the time all of that happened, which probably was like 9 months or so, during which I'd had my diagnosis, it was too far to go. So I asked for a referral to a pediatrician that was close to us. And because I'd gotten my ADHD diagnosis, I just assumed that we would go along and then the doctor would say, I think your child has ADHD. And the pediatrician, who's lovely, still our pediatrician to this day, amazing mum, an amazing woman, she said to me, oh, look, I'm sure you've heard this before, but we think your child is autistic. And I'm like, no, you are the first person to use that word. Tell me more. And then we were talking about things, and I said, but I can see some things that I would say that I do that, and I'm ADHD. And she went, yep, there's probably some of that there too, but we've really got to like go through it. And then we eventually went through an assessment for our child, which involved seeing a speech pathologist for a speech pathology assessment. The pediatrician had already done one. There was the psychologist in the end. Oh, and an occupational therapist went through a sensory profile, like what are the sensory icks or the sensory things that really set our child off, and what are the things that they seek out. Because for both of our children who are autistic and ADHD, they are both sensory seekers in some areas, and in other areas they are sensory avoiders. So if
Okay.
they're controlling the noise, they love the noise. If they can't control the noise, that's a whole other story.
Wow. Wow. And then how does so once you got the diagnosis, how did it then change how you saw them? Because I think I'm interested in that because I think having, becoming a mom has allowed me now to kind of I don't know, like appreciate like differences in people. Like my children are very different, like personality wise.
Mm,
And it's knowing, seeing. I mean, I'm glad for that. Even though this can be a bit of a challenge, I'm glad for it simply because now I appreciate that. Again, this whole nature nurture thing. Like I don't, you
mm.
can bring up two people in the same house, give them the same things, give them the same environment, and it can turn out so different and want different things or be motivated by different things. But I think for me, it's allowed me to appreciate differences a bit more. So even though they're neurotypical, I now appreciate neurodivergence a bit more because I can see a small segment of difference in my children. It allows me to then look at the world and think, there's so many different people and it's incredible. And I can appreciate differences and I don't see it as a negative. I just see it as different and good. And I'm intrigued. I want to learn more. So tell me more then, how did that kind of change how you saw your children and perhaps how you treat them or how you sort of help them understand themselves as well? Because I think that knowledge is power, isn't it?
Absolutely, but it also starts with how you see yourself. Like when I had my diagnosis, I did a massive amount of reading. Like how I
Okay.
understand the world, how I process the world happens two ways. I either read a lot of books and articles, or I do it verbally. And I did a huge amount of reading and understood myself. And I knew before the ADHD diagnosis, I had found out a few years earlier in my 30s after university that I was dyslexic. So when the ADHD diagnosis came along, I got some psychological support, and that was at the time when we were going through the things with Alexander, with our oldest, and that was really helpful because I understood difference. So I was like you, where it's a curiosity thing of like, oh, tell me more. Like, I'm not judging. I'm just trying to understand. How does that work? And I think as a mum, and also because I hadn't grown up with brothers, my first being a boy was just like this whole, like, you are like a whole other species. Just tell, what are we interested in? What do we want to know? And it was so exciting and like fascinating. And I think because I had that approach to difference, that was really helpful. But then as I started reading more about autism too, I guess the other thing that I've come to is going, oh, wow, I do so many of those things. And I think I'm going to need to go for an assessment at some point. And I think part of what it is he said to me one day in the car on one of our appointments, he said to me, Mum, am I sick? And I said, no, babe, you're not sick. And he said, why are we going to all these doctors? What's wrong? I said, there's nothing wrong with you, but you're starting school next year, mate. And here's what I do know. We have to know what kind of brain you have because it really affects how you learn. So we're going to all these doctors. He used to call the pediatrician the talkie doctor because she talked a lot. We're going to the doctor to find out more about what kind of brain you have so that when you get to school next year, we can work out how you will learn best.
I love
And
that.
I think that was sort of the way that I have seen, and I didn't plan it, but that's the way I see him, the way I see us. It's like it's different but not less, and we are going to need to learn all of the life skills that everybody else knows. But and what I said to him is some of the things we learn, we're going to learn them the way everyone does. And sometimes we're going to try that. It's not going to work like with your swimming lessons. and then we're going to have to find something else. So our eldest was originally enrolled in like a typical swimming lesson here, which would be about 4 or 5 kids, and
Okay.
he struggled with that. So for a long time, we have now had him on one lessons because Australia being what it is and such a hot country for so long of the year, swimming is a life skill because there are bodies of water everywhere. So most Australians will have their children learn how to swim, not because they want them to be Olympians, although if that happens, like added bonus, but it's mostly for drowning mitigation, right? Because you want them to know how to handle themselves in the water. Like part of the lessons initially involve like drills and rescues. They teach kids how to grab something so that you can pull somebody else out. What's this? And they have lessons where they have to jump in fully clothed, like you've got to dress them in pajamas or something to learn how to rescue. So I said to him, we're going to learn everything everybody else does, but some things we have to learn in a way that better suits our brains. And
Mm.
that's kind of how we do it. Like it's not, we don't see it as treatment. I just say it's like skill building, and our skills sometimes have to be built differently. But sometimes they'll be done just like everyone else. It just depends.
Daniel, I love that so much. I love your choice of language because I think that's where it's at. Because I think it's so sad that we live in a society that expects everyone to be in this like standard box. Like I don't know why. Like schools just wants us everyone. "Oh, you talk. I mean, it really. I mean, I don't know if it's becoming a mom just allows me to think. Just because people wire differently or think differently, it's not a bad thing. It just need we need to, like you said, they need to accept that they need to learn. They learn differently. Where did you get that language from? Did you have to learn that in a book or something? Because that's incredible to be able to give your kids that.
Yeah. It literally just came out on the fly. We were driving to an appointment with the talkie doctor, and I was literally like, it's just that's just how it is. And I said like, I think I have a different brain, and I have this thing called dyslexia, which you may or may not have. We don't know. We can find out. And that just meant that sometimes some things for me at school were really hard to learn. But I said that's because schools didn't know much about that when I went to school. But I'm like, good news, buddy. You're going to school at a time when people know way more about the brain. So if we know this stuff, then we can help with the teachers and things. So it is just that thing of like, it's part of who you are. And we've had chats since because he had, like, one of the first experiences, it was awful that he had about other children using the word autistic was terrible. But what my philosophy is you're just different. You're not less. Some things are going to be harder, but everybody finds some things hard. It's just for you, they'll be a bit more particular. Because when he got diagnosed, he was in kinder, and he would have been one of the older ones there. Most of the kids were 4, but he was one of a handful of 5-year-olds because where I live in Australia, you can choose what age your child is when they start school. And I thought it was better because his birthday is at the start of the year, which is generally when school starts. In the school year in Australia runs from the calendar year, and it usually starts in February. And I thought it was better for him to be older, not just at primary school, but also at the other end at high school. It's better that he's older rather than younger in the year level. And he had overheard some boys that he thought were friends talking about another child in their kinder class, a little girl who is autistic, and everyone knew she was autistic. And he kept saying to me, Mum, they kept saying she had nothing in her brain. I'm like, why? Why did she? She has nothing in her brain because she's autistic. And the look of fear in his face, I immediately started crying. And I said to him, and you thought that what would they think if they really knew about you? And he just nodded. And I was still crying, but I said to him, okay, mate, I've got good news for you. 2 things. One, they don't know what they're talking about. They may know the word autistic, but I'm saying you know far more about that than they do. They know the word, but they don't really know what it means. Because he said to me, Mum, how am I going to build my rocket ship to the moon? You know, the one that I want to have the jumpy castle attachment. How am I going to build that if there's nothing in my brain? And I said, well, here's the thing. There have been scientists all throughout history who have brains just like you. And we're going to find them and we're going to work out how they did it. Because if they did it, then you can do it. And then I started telling him about Alan Turing, who was one of the code breakers at Bletchley Park that cracked the Enigma code. So he was dyslexic. And I started telling him about Alan Turing, and he was a code breaker. And because he was dyslexic and numbers made more sense to him than letters, it meant that whilst learning to read was hard and that stuff was difficult, because numbers made more sense to him, he spent much more time on that. So that gave him a different interest, because the other thing we talk a lot about in this house is that we have an interest based brain, and that's how we learn. Whereas for other people, they learn by what's important information to either them or where they're at in life. Whereas we learn by what is interesting to us. So if we're having a struggle with something, can we find something in our special interest areas that are attached to the tasks we're not really that fond of to help us get there?
I love that. Honestly, Daniel, I love this so much because I think, your choice of language, your the way you're almost like the internal voice you're building for them as well, because I think it's all about that reference internal voice, because I do believe
Yeah.
that they have the right reference internal voice that's going to carry them through life. So when people say something, they can almost rationalize it because you've broken it down for them. It's not just we're doing this, it's like this is why we do it, this are other people like us. I love that. And you're constantly looking for the reference points where they can start, so that wherever opposition they come across in life, they know the language to use, they know the approach to take. And I love that. And this not only applies to like even neurodivergence, it could apply to like even like racial differences. Because that's
Mm.
something my children face. I mean, they will face. I mean, they're mixed race. And I remember we had a situation where even my children started to notice that in himself. My son once said, I said to him, we were doing a fun video, and I said, "Oh, who do you look like?" And he said, "I look like Alex, my buddy in school." And it's this other, because he's brown. And I thought, that's crazy. Like, you've already found someone who looks like you and you think you look like them. I was expecting him to say, looks like me or his dad. And I think, again, for my kids, unfortunately or fortunately, racial perspective will be a voice in their head. So again, like you,
Mm.
I'm constantly trying to build this racial perspective, this identity for them, so that wherever they come across in life, they can respond well. And I think that's essentially what you're building. I just love that so much. This idea of giving them the literature, giving them the language, giving them the perspective, and you're really breaking it down in such a way that they understand, in such a way that it makes sense, and in such a way that whatever the comments may be, they can respond well. And I think that's what you've done really well. And that's brilliant.
Well, that's what we're looking to do. I mean, look, it is an aim. Our other tool is cake.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but it is common in the autistic community for adults when they're newly diagnosed to get a cake.
All
So
right.
when my daughter was diagnosed last year, we asked her first, by the way, I just want to point that out for anyone watching.
Okay.
We asked first and said, could we get you a cake to celebrate? And she said, what would it say? And I said, it would say, congratulations or congrats on the autism and ADHD. And she went, yep, let's do it. So we got the cake and she loved it because my son had had that bad experience that we talked about. I
Yeah.
wanted her first experience of that world to be a positive one. And then I said to my son, okay, let's do one for you. Do you want to do it at the same time? And he said, no. What was the date you got my report on? And I'm like, oh, I'll have to look that up. And he said, yep, we'll do that. And then he said, can we do the cake every year? And I said, yeah, it's a cake, but it's not like a full birthday. So it's not like partying people, but it's a cake. And he said, yeah, let's call them brain birthdays. And so at the start, they have, before we like cut the cake, we have this little speech about how this circle of people around this cake, these are the people who love you and your brain, no matter how it shows up. Like, this is your safe space kind of thing. And it is just trying to give them language, because I know the world will be cruel, but
Yeah.
unlike when I was growing up, they actually know the names. So I said to, say to them, if somebody thinks being autistic or being ADHD is bad, that's on them, not you. That's actually the accurate word. Whereas when I was a kid, there were all sorts of harmful labels, like doesn't pay attention, can't focus on details, all sorts of harmful things that, teachers and people say when they don't really know this sort of stuff. Whereas I'm like, well, we've got the accurate language and we're just going to try and give you ways to feel okay about it when the world tries to make you feel bad about it. Because I know those days are coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's yeah, and you're right, and it's something I always think about now as I raise my children. It's how can I prepare them, even though to just to understand themselves, so that throughout life in places where they're different or they seem different, they don't fit the mold, can they go back to their brains and self and not cut themselves short, you know? Because I think we definitely need to raise children who are gentle with themselves. And that thread is so important because um, this idea of liking yourself, self awareness, self forgiveness, self gentleness is so important because it's easy to be the opposite. Actually, I actually think it's easy to be hard on yourself. It's easy to to allow people to label you. It's easy to fall into that trap. But I think I'm always thinking, how can we give them that internal gentle voice? Because I think that's where it's at. Because it's something I've struggled with myself, just because I was brought up to, to be good, to be amazing, to be intelligent. So I think I just have this voice in my head that's always like, it's hard. It's a hard voice. It's a tough voice. So I know I need more of the opposite. Yeah, and I think in a similar way, this whole thread of being gentle with themselves, because I think ultimately we're raising them for a world where they can be incredible, right? Whichever way that may be. So one part, and I'm looking at now the thread. One part of that thread for you is obviously allowing them to see the differences as been a good thing because you can, if you know and understand yourself, you can then know how you approach and how you learn, and it can be successful in your own way. And I think we spoke about this the other day. Another thread of this voice in their head is also the idea of even like creativity and boredom, how they look at boredom. Boredom is not, it's not a bad thing. It's okay to be bored because that's how creativity starts, or thinking outside of the box. So let's talk a bit about that as well, because again, that's another thread in raising children, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
it is. And look, what I would say about the other stuff too is while we do encourage them to feel proud of themselves and embrace who they are, I also like don't sugarcoat it. And I'm like, there will be bad days. There will be days when you don't love this, your brain, where you think, God, if I could throw it out the window, I would. But at the same time, it's who you are. So like yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act between being like self-aware enough to go, oh, that's not ideal, but also to not go so far that they end up in that almost self-loathing perfectionist kind of area. And it's sort of an ongoing thing. But I guess with boredom, one of the things my mum taught me, because she grew up on a farm that was so far away from everywhere else, and she was number 6 in a family of 7, and they had to entertain themselves. And one of the things she impressed upon me in my childhood, because as a ADHD, like boredom is almost physically painful, right? You just can't deal with boredom. Boredom is terrible. And you get into this sort of panic and this catastrophe. And what she tried to explain to me is that boredom is like the start of something. And it wasn't her job to solve my boredom. That was my job to do. And if you start thinking about it as like an opportunity, like what could you do with this time? What could you do in your head with this thing? Then that's where the creativity kind of comes from. And one of the things, because my kids are explicit learners, is I tell them, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this and say the boredom is fun. It is not. But you have to get bored in your brain to come up with something good, to have a good idea. And people who are creative are the people who can play with an idea and sit in that uncomfortable part of being bored for long stretches of time. And when they can kind of play with an idea in their head or their mind's eye, however you like conceptualize that, that is where the best creativity comes from, because you can sit with that discomfort and go, okay, this feeling's not going to kill me, and I'm not going to spend, and it's not that I don't sometimes spend time doom scrolling and doing things I shouldn't do, but basically your creativity starts when you're like, okay, how do I solve this, and how long can I sit with this discomfort? Because the longer that you can do that, and it is, I guess, in a way, a self-regulation situation, which is an important part for our neurodivergent kids, about like if you can regulate your way out of boredom, then that's something to think about. Like one of the things that my kids will often come in at night and say, I can't get to sleep, I'm really bored, I can't get to sleep. And I say, okay, a couple of things. You don't need to get to sleep. That's not your job. Sleep's going to come for you sometime between here and now. What do you want to think about? Let's banish all the weird bad thoughts that your brain's going to have, because that once you stop, you might have a lot of weird unfinished thoughts in your brain. What do you want to think about? do we want to think about what we want to do tomorrow because tomorrow's a weekend because it's, it's Friday night here in Australia. Do we want to think about what we can do tomorrow and what we can do with our friends and how that's going to go? Or have we got a trip coming up and we might want to think about what activities we want to do? Like, what is a happy thought spiral that we can spend our time on? Like, what is a good, like, thinking kind of problem to solve? Because that's, and then you kind of go with that. So I'm trying to do those sorts of little things so that moments of boredom then aren't like horrific, and we just kind of sit with the discomfort as much as we can. And keeping in mind, I guess, that for some neurodivergent kids, and ours are probably as much of this as others, that uncertainty tolerance, when you don't know what is going to happen next, that uncertainty tolerance can be really difficult to sit with. So, like when you and I last chatted, I had just come home from our Easter holiday, and we had, due to roadworks, been stuck in a really long traffic jam. And part of that with my kids was I kept saying to them, "Look, guys, you're doing really well. I'm not going to lie, this is not fun, and no one likes this. But just because we don't know what's going to happen next doesn't mean it's going to be bad. So, like, what songs do we want to listen to? What are the other things that we can think about, right? Like, this is hard, and you're doing the best that you can." And I often do that kind of thing with my kids. Like, it's okay to be in that survival mode. And then once you can get past that feeling, again, going back to that sort of boredom and creativity, once you can get past that survival mode of thinking, this is a disaster, this is going to be terrible, once you can get past that, then that's where the other stuff starts. And that's where your creative thinking comes into play.
I like that so much because I think we do, I suppose, living in a society that puts a lot of pressure on parents to like, I don't know, to like save their kids from boredom or constantly give them activities. Or, I mean, I speak to so many people about it. It was like years ago, my parents just didn't even notice I was in the house. They didn't come and, talk to me or play with my toys with me. Just left them to it. But now we're like under this pressure of like, swimming, acrobatics, I don't know, gymnastics, dancing, and then,
Hmm.
it's just constantly required to keep them entertained. It's like our job is like full-time entertainment or give them things that would entertain them. And yeah, it is hard, I think, because you almost feel like you want to solve it. But I've often found, I mean, one thing I do that's really helpful for me, and obviously, I don't judge anyone who does anything different, is I don't give my kids screens when we leave the house. As soon as we leave the house, like, no screens. So we can watch telly when we're in the house, and I don't care. We watch more than an hour of a day of telly. Apparently, you're supposed to not watch more than an hour, but I'm like, whatever. But once we leave the house, no screens. And I've often found that, again, that idea of being bored, the idea of wanting to be entertained means that they talk to people, they ask questions, but again, it puts more on me to have to then entertain them in terms of like pointing things out, talking, or interacting. But yeah, I definitely
Mm.
found that that puts them in a position now when they're incredible with people. They're always asking questions, introducing themselves to people all the time, and I think that's incredible. I think that's amazing, and it's because they don't have a screen in front of them, so they're constantly looking for things to do or people to interact with. But I've really
Yeah.
noticed that to be a good thing for them.
Oh, totally. And we do the same. Like, don't do screens in the car. We don't do screens outside of the house like you. And I think it is about that. So a lot of the time for me, it's just basic and it's about safety, right? Like,
Yes.
we don't use screens because we need to watch out. There's roads, there's cars, there's people. And yeah, as you're saying, it can be stressful for you as a parent because then your social battery is on like high demand kind of voltage. But at the same time, you're also teaching them how to be in the world. And if you then give time to like power that social battery down when you get home, which is one of our rules. Like, we get home from a family function and all four of us, my husband, myself, my two kids, all four of us go in four different directions for at least an hour
Wow.
because we're a bit people. It was like, yeah, that's great. We did all of that. It was awesome. We interacted, we asked questions, we did all the things. Maybe we were bored, we waited our turn, we did all of the stuff.
Mm.
And now our social battery is low, and that's okay. And we just need some time to like have the social battery come up again and have that recovery time before we're ready for whatever comes next.
I love that. I love that. Because I do think, yeah, I think parenting is, I don't know, like, again, I like what you said about the observance, because I think that's something that I see in my children. It's like the more, because I think what I want them to build is, I want them to build the social cues, the social um skills, being able to read body language, to read facial expression, to notice things about people. Because I think once they build all that, then they can have the screens. That makes sense. Because later on, things will change. They'll probably want an iPad later on, and I'm fine with that. But I want them to observe things in people first, to build that social skills before they build their online skills. Because I feel like everything online happens so quickly. So if they're busy, um, if they're so into that, then they may miss things in the real world. But yeah, I do think it's interesting now they see things that, the most random things, then we'll talk about it. But again, it does take a lot. But I think it gives them so much more of a richer experience of life. And I think ultimately we want to, raise children who can thrive in any world. I know obviously technology is still a big part of their lives, but it's trying to find that balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And also, like, social, like, one thing I think is really important is also to socialize in lots of different environments. Like, my kids, I guess, given their neurodivergence, they may not be that awesome at picking up on social cues,
Yeah.
but they will still socialize, right? So they go to a sports club in the summer for little athletics, and they socialize with other kids there. My daughter does gymnastics; she socializes with that. My son learns piano on Zoom, but there's regular performance lessons where he plays with the other students of his teacher. So we're just trying to do lots of different kinds of socializing, but also, like, we send them to a school where that's the local neighbourhood school, right? We live opposite one of Melbourne's mosques, which you wouldn't necessarily know driving past it because it's this big but very modern building, and it's just a beautiful building. So they know from that, and from childcare, they know about Eid, they know about Ramadan. Like, I remember one of the childcare workers saying to me once, she said, "Your son is so thoughtful. He asked me today if I was hungry and if I was going okay with the fasting because he understood that." And the reason we know that is the connection and the social skills we've made with our next door neighbours, and they bring us things at their time of year, and we're Catholic, so we take them things at our time of year. And it's just building a whole bunch of different relationships with all sorts of people from all different walks of life. And school is also great for that because they go to a school that's a government school, so it's they've got students of all different cultures that are all celebrated, and that's an important thing. Like, you are proud of your culture, but you're also proud to share it. And I think it's important to try to give them as wide a variety of life skills as you possibly can,
I love that.
even in a situation where, like, our kids might have certain things that they might struggle with. They're still going to need to develop skills. They're still human. They're still going to need to, like, human, but in a way that suits them and is supportive of stuff they struggle with. Like, tomorrow, with the art that we're going to do in the morning, we've invited a friend over, and the kids are in bed asleep, so they don't necessarily know this. But the friend that we've invited over is somebody who has a PDA profile, which some people who are watching and listening would know that for some people who are neurodivergent with what's called a PDA profile, sometimes when you ask things, how you ask things can be really important because they will take someone asking a question on a nervous system basis as a demand, right? So what I was saying to the friend is, look, here is all the information, and if tomorrow doesn't work, this friend of my daughter can come over any Saturday and we can do this activity at a time that suits her. So if tomorrow is too soon or they're unsure, that's okay. We'll do it another time. And so my daughter was like, "Oh, so are they coming over?" And I said, "I'm just not sure yet. They'll let us know." So we give them the information, and then they can have the full agency to make the decision. And I'm writing the message to the mum saying, "This is just the information, zero pressure, and this is just the background and the context because they haven't had a playtime together yet. And this is just for whenever they're free. If it's tomorrow, great. If not, we'll do it another time." And it's just all of that stuff about giving people enough information and agency, but also giving them experiences, even within certain vulnerabilities that, being disabled might make challenging.
Oh, I like that so much. I love that I don't know, you're like, yeah, you're really going into the detail. And I think, I think that's incredible because ultimately what you're doing is equipping your children for a world that's never black or white, right? Sometimes there's different shades of grey, and they get in, like you said, there's so many variations of things that they will come across. And I suppose in my world, for me and my children, my thing has always been like traveling. So traveling, I think, exposes them to so much more than what they are, because I grew up in an environment that just emphasized education, like academics is the most important thing. And unfortunately, well, you learn as you grow. I don't regret anything because everything teaches you, right? But I certainly understand now that there's so much more that they will need to thrive in a world that's uncertain, in a world that who knows if tech is going to take over or AI is going to take over. But I think if we can build certain skills for them, then they can thrive and be okay. And for me, traveling has been a good big thing. For number one, it's the again from a social perspective, just diversity of culture and behaviors and how people conduct themselves. I mean, for example, in England, we were talking about this yesterday. In England, people smile a lot, and you're expected to smile. It's like a social thing where you smile,
Mm.
good morning, whether you feel like doing it or not. We have the stiff upper lip. But in certain cultures, they don't go around smiling. Doesn't mean they're sad or happy. Like, well, for example, I mean, no offense to anyone who's from Poland or listening, but and Nigerians are like that. Like, we would just have a neutral kind of expression, right? And we've been to Poland, for example, and I remember like the kids are a bit confused that someone is not like openly smiling at them, and I've had to explain to them that certain cultures they just don't go around smiling. Some cultures are very direct. Some cultures don't need you to say thank you a million times, like within the UK. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But in certain cultures, you say thank you once, like Spanish,
Yeah.
yeah, or Spanish. Say thank you, you move on. They just mean you mean it more, and I want them to understand that, so they don't think people are rude or people don't like them or people are dismissive. Because a lot of times people internalize that, oh, that person's not smiling, they don't like me. They might just be having a bad day. It's got nothing to do with you. Just carry on as you are. And I think for me, it's important that they see that they don't internalize that the wrong way. And hopefully, I think have a better life because they're not so consumed by what's like. Do you know what I mean? Like you want to be able to read a room, but you don't want to read it too much of an extent that you internalize it
Oh, totally.
negatively.
And I think that's really interesting and it's beautiful because it's teaching them to be citizens of the
Yeah.
world. And it's teaching them that in different cultures, different things happen. Like one of a play friend of our kids, they don't eat pork in their house. So when that person comes over, no one eats pork in our house. And our kids know that because that's just like a sign of respect. Like it would be disrespectful to eat that around that person, and that's their cultural practice. And with sensory stuff, we sort of say, and that's it. I guess it's a cultural thing too. We sort of say, I will always ask, when anyone's play date or birthday parties, what are there any food allergies or sensitivities or just icks where because those sorts of things a little bit like with cultures if you know them you can work with them and I think explicitly teaching your child about other cultures is a really great way to show them that difference is just difference, right? And I think maybe you and I, we weren't necessarily taught that. And it's not that our parents didn't think of that, it's just that it was a different time. And I think what's beautiful about now and teaching kids to be citizens of the world is teaching them that there are lots of different ways to do something. And there are lots of different cultural practices. It's not a question of bad or good, it's just a question of different. And I think that's a really interesting way of like giving your kids a different kind of education because it's still educating them about other cultures, right?
Absolutely.
You're trying to teach them about the world, and that's amazing.
Yeah, because then the way I look at it is if they appreciate difference and they can give other people grace, but they can also give themselves grace. I think
Mm.
that's ultimately what I'm trying to do. It's not that, because sometimes, like for example, my kids have this thing about that's a bad guy. They have this like, like young children because they watch these shows about, Sheriff Labrador. They say Sheriff Labrador. Oh my God, like this American dog that goes around doing things. Bad guy. I'm going to arrest you, And they're like, that's a bad guy. And I'm sometimes trying to teach them that again, people are not always bad, but people do bad things. And I kind of even show it with them. Like when they do something, they say, oh, Mom, am I naughty? I'll say, no, you've done something naughty. And it's just trying to, again, just remove the label, show them that you can do something bad, but, people do bad things. What are their motivations? Can we understand a bit more? Because I just think listen, more grace, more mercy, more kindness. It's never amiss in this world we live in. And if you wire your brain for that, I think you have a better life, because then it's like, doesn't mean you will put yourself in on, obviously, still teach them to not put themselves in unsafe situations, but just sometimes, just all the time, just give that grace. Because then when you give yourself that grace, you can give other people the grace, and it just makes the world a better place. And that's what I've learned over time, and I really want them to internalize. Um, but I also
Yeah,
like,
we do that. We call them bad
oh
choices.
right, okay,
Like people aren't bad, their choices are bad, right? And it's that same sort of thing. And I actually think it's also a safety thing,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because nobody is either good or bad. And so if you teach them that it's about choices, you over time they're starting to look at people's behaviors and the things that they see in a more complex and nuanced way, and that is a safety thing.
yeah. Because the world is complex and it is nuanced, and that's again, let's go like going back to my ambition. It's like what, and going back to, no, actually you go back to like, even you getting the diagnosis, it's like you get that diagnosis
Mhm.
again. It's about knowing, having that knowledge, and then being able to design the life around who you are. Because I think that
Yes.
that's where it's at. Because I mean, I'll give you an example. So yesterday when we were on the train, we we're coming back from London back to Northeast, I was with the kids, and we sat across these two brothers, and honestly, we had the most amazing conversations. So it ended up being two brothers. One is a scientist, one is develops games. And we talked about everything, because I was like, oh my God, you're that scientist? Told my kids they're real life scientists. Obviously, we had all the questions. I mean, we spoke about everything. We spoke from like Boeing to like behaviors, and at some point in that conversation, they actually told me they were both autistic, because we just spoke that much, and I'm super intrigued. I'm like, tell me more. And they were both saying now they're not formally diagnosed because they didn't want to. They said they don't want to be on a database somewhere, but they know that they're autistic. And I just loved talking to them, because I thought, I'm not sure how that shows up in their life, but what they eventually told me was, by understanding themselves, they now are able to design their life in a way that allows them to live well, just because they know what they're dealing
Yes.
with. For them, they didn't need to be on a database to get the structure. They just have to know themselves, and they can then live life in a way. But honestly, they were incredible, and I thought, I just loved sitting across from them, and we had so much to talk about. And I just thought, wow, that's another example that it's okay to be different if you understand how it, maybe how you make your choices, how you live, how you deal with the world, how you learn, because then you can just apply it in the right way and not try to fit the mold. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly found that. I guess with ADHD, it's only slightly different because I take medication and that does need the doctor and the stuff. But I think the same choice is true because I felt like when I got that information and I got that diagnosis, I had a choice.
Okay.
Do I keep living the life that I was living with all of the coping mechanisms that weren't really working and that were stressing me out, and I was close to burnout most of the time,
Mm.
and I felt like I was like a subpar neurotypical. Do I want to keep pretending, or do I want to find out what suits my brain? And that knowledge of like what works for your brain, how to set up systems, all of that stuff is really powerful. Like I'll give you an example. I have what I would describe in my brain as I I don't have a lot of what's called auto automaticity, right? So I don't have a lot of automatic things that happen in my brain. Some people might refer to it as like the autopilot mode, right? Where you just do something without thinking. That doesn't exist for me. Everything I do, every hour of the day, every moment of the day is a conscious choice. And because it's a conscious choice, you then have to think through, okay, what are the steps that go with that? And so you use a lot of your working memory, in my case, on this sort of stuff. So I'll give you an example. For when I have work days, but most days of the week, I know what I'm going to have for breakfast every day of the week. So every day except Sunday is either cold muesli or porridge, and on Sundays it's eggs. And the night before, I put out clothes for the next day. I look at the weather forecast, I put out some clothes for the next day. Two options if I'm not sure. Because part of that lack of automatic processing in my brain means that I am that person who can sit on the Netflix menu for 90 minutes just scrolling through, not sure and not able to do it because my working memory is just overloaded and I'm just not able to make another decision. And so part of what the systems that I set up for me and for our family, I guess, are about what can I do to cut down on decisions. So like today I went shopping, for example. It's Friday. I did the I did the shopping at the fruit and veggies. But we have now a meal plan for every day of the week. So I've done the fruit and veg. My husband will go to the supermarket tomorrow and that'll finish off the shopping. And we now know what we're going to eat pretty much every night for the rest of the week. And again, it's just cutting down on that decisions. So you want to think of the life of like, what are the things that are going to make you thrive? And for me, it's having less decisions every day, knowing what's coming next. And it's just about, and I guess like the lovely chaps that you met on the train, it's just what are the things that suit me and my brain, and how do I set up our family in a way that helps that?
That's so interesting. So it's almost as if, and I think the same applies to motherhood in a way, because motherhood is not,
Hmm.
it's not straightforward as taking a bunch of lessons online, or like, wake up at 6 a.m., sleep when the baby sleeps. I don't know, like, I just think there's a lot out there that you can feel overwhelmed if you're trying to kind of approach motherhood in this structured, standard way. But I think, like you said, it's about observing yourself and then thinking, okay, how can I do motherhood in a way that best suits me on the basis of how I see it as how do I define a successful motherhood? And I think that that's how I've looked at motherhood.
Yeah,
That's really helped me. Because I think when we do that, then you almost kind of make peace with the way that you're going about it. You make peace with your own path. I think, for example, for me, I've appreciated that there's certain things I give up, and I'm okay to give up to live this life. For example, I'm not like I've closed down my 40 tabs. I've only kept two open. I don't compare myself with people. Like, for example, I don't use social media a lot, so I only use mainly LinkedIn. I don't use Instagram, because I found out when I used Instagram, it just put me it gave me a front seat to everyone's lives and everyone's, marriage, or how they're raising their children and what they have. And it just gave me this sort of anxiety and this need to keep up. But since I stopped using Instagram, I feel a lot more happy in myself. I feel a lot more like ignorance is almost bliss. I'm like, I don't know what's going on out there, but my life is pretty wonderful. And yeah, so I think just like you're designing your life and your life to make sense of who you are, and to make sure that you're living the best version of Danielle. I think motherhood is the same for a lot of people. It's like you've got to really look at motherhood as, how can I set this up in a way that allows me to live it the best? It doesn't have to be happy all the time. It doesn't have to be perfect, but how can I live it well? And like I said, for me, it's the social media stuff. It's making choices that are limited, but exactly what I want. Things like also with work, I prioritize the children over my career. My career is more for smaller parts of me now, and I've understood that my greatest ambition is raising incredible children. So I'm able to give work. Work for me is a second thing. So because of that, when it's like school holidays, for example,
hmm.
I take more time off because I know that I just want to spend more time with them. And because I've made that decision in my head,
Yeah,
I then cut down my finances to reflect that. So I think it's all these little decisions that we're making. So, for example, because I'm working less, I would, for example, make my own coffee. I don't really buy a lot of takeaway coffee.
mm.
I just buy less stuff. I'm less materialistic because I'm like, I just know the material stuff is nice, but it's not the main thing. The time with the children is. So I think it's interesting how you just have to design your life to kind of fit what you want. And I don't know, like, do you think about that, like motherhood and how you're designing it and how you're living it, what you're giving up, what you're just
Yeah.
yeah,
I think I do, but I think you make decisions in a really different way. Like I remember my mum saying when I became a new mum, she didn't give me any advice, she didn't tell me stuff. And then when I had the kid, she was like, "See, I can't actually tell you what it's going to look
yeah,
like because you have to work, right? It's going to be what works for you and Matthew, what works for the kids. That's up to you to work that out. My job is to support that." And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And yeah, I guess since then I've been like, okay, well, what does work for us? And because of the kind of kids that we have, and because we're a neurodivergent household, I'm super comfortable with the fact that my experiences are really going to be different to everybody
yeah,
else's. And it's interesting when you have chats with people about whether it's motherhood or family or whatever it is, I never for a second expect that my experiences will be widely shared. But it's interesting. I notice that other mums who have neurotypical kids do expect that whatever they consider, whatever their typical experience is, that that's what everybody else is thinking. And see, I never think that because I'm like, well, we've got variables, right? Like we're outliers just by definition. It's not bad. It's just who we
Yeah.
are. So I'm okay with that. And I think because of that, I'm also able to step aside from what the shoulding and the coulding, right? That happens a lot with motherhood, particularly in the early years. Because it's like, well, that's great, but that doesn't really apply to me. This is not that kind of life where I'm sitting around thinking, which is the best way to make this decision. I don't have that sort of luxury, right? I'm doing things on a combination of instinct and a bit of research, but it's freeing in a way because it does allow you to step aside and go, that's interesting, but not for me. And it's okay.
Oh,
I respect that if that's what your thing is, but it's not for me. We're going to do what works for us because anything else is just too much. And we've got some specific needs and they will change over time, right? The kids' needs will change, my needs will change. Like you at the moment, work is a secondary thing, but I don't think that's going to last forever either, right? Like there's different seasons of your kids and what they need from you and how all of that works. And I think I love the freedom that it brings to be like,
mm,
okay, I'm doing this for and for what works for us. And one of the things I always say to my kids is there's what happens in this house, and then there's what happens in the world outside of this house. And in the world outside of this house, some of the behaviors that you show up for us will be treated really differently and they won't be treated with kindness and they'll, people come down on you like a ton of bricks. Certain things will happen. We treat them differently here because this is your safe space and this is like where you can go
yeah.
to let off steam and to do all of that stuff. But our house is going to be different to other houses, that you go into. And that's okay. That's just part of life. And I think it's important to kind of like give your kids the freedom to not have to feel like they are keeping up with everybody else. Because
Mm,
I think like all that stuff about peer pressure, that maybe we all went through as teenagers, I feel like that returns again with mothering. Only in the same way that as a teenager, I'm like, well, that's all very interesting, but I'm not at all interested in it. It's the same again with mothering, where I'm like, yeah, there's some interesting thoughts, but I'm not sharing them. I'm not engaging with that. That's not my world.
I love that so much.
And I don't know what that is, but it's just an instinctive thing.
I love that. I love that. I think that's I love that. You said it's sorry about like outlier. And I love that so much. 'Cause I think, yeah, I think
Yeah,
if you approach it like you are an outlier and you kind of like build it in a way that works for you, makes sense. Because I think some people might look at my ambition and go, how are they able to have, I mean, I've got a job, career, I've got my ambition, got kids, and I say, well, how's she doing that? I wish I could have a podcast. But guys, honestly, I've got an incredible supportive mother-in-law who's retired and does the children's stuff full time. So if you're looking at my life and thinking, I wish I could have a podcast, but I can't because I don't have time, it's because I can. Does that make sense? Because I have the structure, I have the support.
mm,
I could be as motivated, as driven as I want to, but if I didn't have someone who could look after my kids whilst I was on this podcast, it may not be possible. So I think when you look at your life like that, you actually are, looking at the facts, looking at what's around you, then I think you make peace with like accepting that it doesn't have to be like someone else. We look at social media, but people on social media, some have nannies, some have, I don't know what they have, but you don't see behind the scenes. And if you're comparing yourself to that,
totally.
yeah, then you will struggle if you think, why can't I do that? They're doing it, super moms, juggling CEO careers and climbing ladders and with their babies on their back or something. But yeah, I definitely think a lot of motherhood for me and what makes me really enjoy this is that I genuinely look at my life and I'm like, how can I make the most of my circumstances? And how can I get the best out of this? And when you do that, I think it allows you to it just gives you a lot of peace and a lot of conviction. And like you said, a lot of conviction about how you live it and the freedom to know that it may not be perfect, but it's great. And you know, it's the best you have for your circumstances.
Yeah, it does. And there's that, I always love that Dolly Parton saying that you find out who you are and then you do it on purpose. And that's what I feel like this is. Like I now know all of who I am and I'm helping my kids come to terms with that and we're doing it on purpose and it's great because it's who we are and it gives you certain freedoms to be like, okay, this is my life and if other people do things differently, I don't like I'm never jealous of other people. All I have ever wanted in my life is to work out a way to not be stuck in hard mode because I felt like before the diagnosis and before that, everything was so much more effort for me. And I could never work out why it was so much harder. And then it's like, oh, okay, it's like I've been playing the game of life on hard mode. Okay, how do I get it on unhard mode? Because I still want this life with this family, these kids, this world, and I want it to make sense. I just want it to be not as difficult. And that's all it is. But like and I say that like it's easy. It's not,
I
but
get that.
it's a process that's worthwhile for investing for all of us in like how do we make this a bit simpler? How can this work better?
No, but that makes sense. And I think it's, yeah, no, no, you make a good point there because I think life doesn't have to be perfect to be enjoyable. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think it's, and especially, I mean, we spoke to, I don't know if you know Charlie Beswick. Yes,
Yep.
and she,
Know the
yeah,
name.
she often says, no, I wouldn't trade my life for anything else. And, you know, her son needs her a lot. And it's like, you, even though she knows there's a version of her that when she first had a son would have hoped everything was perfect, you know, the expectations different from the reality. There's a part of it that's like, this is hard, but this is great too because of the person you become, because of the lessons you learn. And maybe that is what life is. And I think
Mm.
maybe that's what motherhood reveals for us. It's like it's a two-way learning experience. You know, we're raising our children, but they're quietly raising us too. And it's interesting how we learn these lessons in the trenches, right? And it's something we pass on to our children. This idea that life doesn't have to be what you wanted or what you expected, but doesn't mean it can't be amazing. And that I think that's a good lesson for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before you have kids, you just assume, as I did, that you're going to teach them stuff, that it's one way learning. But actually, it's two-way learning. And the thing about my kids being who they are, because they've got no way to hide any of it, is that it does give me like permission and more grace with myself to be like, oh, all that stuff that I've spent years hiding from the world, thinking everyone's going to hate that version of me. Actually, that's who I really am. And for their sake, I've got to lean into that more and go, actually, yeah, that is what I prefer, and that's
Yeah.
okay, And I lean into they're so curious about the world because I'm curious too. I mean, I think that's why I became a journalist because I have a job that gives me the social permission to ask as many questions as I like because I'm curious. And I think your kids teach you so much about like not just about yourself now and who you are when you become a mum, but they also reveal things that you forgot along the way about little you, at various points. Like I'm often reminded of little moments that I had as a kid that you kind of think you've forgotten when you have children. And I think that's really beautiful. And it makes you see your own parents in a new light. Like sometimes I say to mum, geez, I must have been a handful. And she's like, stop saying that. You weren't bad. And I'm like, no, I don't think I was bad. I just kind of think like maybe I was a bit of hard work. And she went, you are the greatest source of joy. Like, shut up with that. Like, that's not how this works. I'm like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm appreciating as a parent that there's a lot in that. And she's like, yeah, but that's why you have kids because you want to put that into somebody. And yeah, you do. It's hard, but it's also really joyful. And you're creating these amazing lives that you're like their spiritual caretaker until they're ready to kind of do that and go out into the world.
And we better start wrapping up because honestly, I'm shocked. I'm
No,
shocked, guys, by the way, that my kids, 3 and 5, are downstairs, like they haven't like come upstairs. Yeah, I mean they are in front.
I
I mean
feel,
they are in front.
I feel like you're going to have a day in a good way. You know what I mean? Like this is like a red letter day for you. So there's going to be a couple of other things where you're like, I don't know how I pulled
No,
this
seriously,
off. I'm going to try and think I do and see if I can
yeah,
do it again
we will back.
sometime.
Because my daughter has this thing where she just will come up. I'm shocked. She hasn't come up to us for the toilet. Like, what's going on here? This conversation wasn't meant to happen. So yeah, we better wrap it up.
Yeah,
Otherwise, I can hear them. I can imagine they'll soon start coming up now. But yeah, no, this is incredible. Yeah, this has been incredible, Danielle. I love that.
Thanks so much. It's been great to chat, and thank you so much for having me. Really
No,
appreciate it.
likewise. I think what I've taken from this is this idea of building a life that fits you rather than continue to be like a subpar version of someone else's normal, and this idea of
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like designing your life, embracing yourself. Yes, getting a diagnosis. Yes, accepting that your brain will learn differently, but what you're giving your children about the literature, their perspective on themselves, this balance of curiosity in ourselves, but curiosity in the world, knowing other people, understanding other people, giving ourselves grace, giving out grace to other people. There's just so much here that I think is really incredible. But thank you for showing up and being open about it all.
No, no, that's fine. That's fine. It's my pleasure. And I think it's interesting. Like, it's really good to chat about these
Mm,
things because I think much of what the coulds and the shoulds and what we think is about success is somebody else has built it. But what does it look like for us? Like, what's a meaningful life to you?
mm.
And I think they're important questions to.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you online?
I'm on the socials. So I'm on Twitter, but mostly LinkedIn, I guess. I can share with you the account links if you put them in show notes or whatever. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as Danielle Cahill. And I'm pretty sure I'm on Twitter because I did all of this before I got married because
Okay.
I use Danielle Cahill is my
Okay.
byline. So I have a married name, but I don't really use that
Okay.
professionally because the name that meant something in the world was who I was
Yeah,
before that. So.
absolutely. Oh, well, guys, Danielle, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for listening. If Alex was here, I know what she'll say. Please like and smash. No. Oh, see, I've already messed it up. Please smash the like button. Can you tell? Yes. Smash the like button. Smash, smash, smash. Like, comment, connect with us on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting us. And this has just been incredible. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.